Ethan moved quietly down the marble hallway, his mop gliding across the polished floor like it was part of him. He had worked as a janitor in the towering Grant Industries building for nearly 5 years, yet most people barely noticed him. He liked it that way, no questions, no attention, just the hum of the lights above and the soft swish of his mop. That morning was different, though. The air felt lighter, and the silence was broken by the faint click of small footsteps. Looking up, Ethan saw a teenage girl standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, her gaze lost in the sprawling city below. She was clearly out of place among the steady stream of suits and briefcases, her clothes neat but youthful, her posture hesitant, as if she wasn't sure she belonged there. Ethan recognized her instantly from the company's occasional gossip, Lily, the CEO's daughter. She didn't notice him at first, but as he approached, he saw she was dangerously close to the patch of freshly mopped tiles. Instinctively, without thinking, he spoke in the language of his childhood, his voice barely above a whisper, "Be careful, the floor is slippery." He expected the usual puzzled look he got whenever Mandarin slipped from his lips. Instead, Lily turned, her eyes widening in surprise, and answered fluently, "Thank you, uncle," her tone warm and natural, as though she had been speaking the language all her life. Ethan's grip on the mop tightened, a strange mix of shock and nostalgia flooding him. He hadn't spoken Mandarin with anyone here in years, not since leaving his tiny mountain village behind. Yet here was the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the city, answering him in the familiar, comforting tones of home. For a moment, time seemed to fold in on itself. He could almost smell the steamed buns from the market stalls, hear the laughter of his childhood friends. Lily gave him a small smile before turning back toward the window, unaware that she had just cracked open a door Ethan thought was long shut. He stood there, heart thudding, not realizing that this brief, quiet exchange would ripple far beyond that polished hallway, drawing their lives together in ways neither could yet imagine. Richard Grant stepped out of the glass-walled conference room, straightening his suit jacket after a tense meeting with investors, when he spotted his daughter standing a few feet away, talking to the janitor. At first, he barely registered the scene, but then the words drifting toward him made him stop mid-step. Mandarin. Clear, fluid Mandarin flowing between Lily and the quiet man with the mop. Richard's mind stuttered. Lily had never shown interest in learning the language, and he had certainly never taught her. "Lily," he called, his voice sharper than intended. She turned quickly, her eyes widening at his tone, and walked toward him. Ethan lowered his head respectfully, stepping back. "Where did you learn that?" Richard asked, still processing what he had heard. Lily shrugged as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "From Mom. She used to sing me lullabies in Mandarin when I was little." The words landed in Richard's chest like a stone. Anna, his late wife, had never told him she spoke Mandarin, let alone that she'd taught their daughter. He glanced at Ethan, who was still standing nearby, silent and still, but there was something in the man's expression, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even emotion, that made Richard look twice. "And you," Richard said, directing his attention to the janitor, "you speak Mandarin too?" Ethan nodded once. "Yes, sir. It's my first language." Richard studied him for a long moment, suspicion and curiosity twining together. The resemblance between Ethan's accent and the soft tones Anna used to hum was uncanny. There was no time to press further, he had a call waiting, but as he ushered Lily toward his office, Richard's mind was already turning. He had spent years building an empire, learning to read people, and his instincts told him this wasn't a coincidence. Something tied Ethan to Anna, something buried in the years before Richard met her. As the elevator doors closed, Richard glanced back through the narrowing gap and caught Ethan watching them with an unreadable expression, his mop idle in his hands. The CEO's pulse quickened. He didn't like unanswered questions, and now one was standing right in his own hallway. That afternoon, when the office had quieted and most employees had left for lunch, Richard summoned Ethan to his corner office. The janitor arrived a few minutes later, standing just inside the door with his cap in his hands, shoulders slightly hunched as if trying to take up less space. Richard gestured for him to sit, though Ethan remained standing. You speak Mandarin fluently, Richard began, leaning back in his chair. Did you know my wife? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ethan hesitated, his gaze dropping to the carpet before lifting again. Yes, sir, but a long time ago. We grew up in the same village in China. Richard's breath caught. Anna had never mentioned such a connection. And you never thought to tell me this? He pressed. Ethan's voice softened. When I came to this country, I had nothing. No money, no family. I found this job, and I wanted to earn my place honestly, not by clinging to the past. He paused, as though weighing whether to say more. Anna was, like a sister to me. We were neighbors. She used to help my mother sell vegetables in the market. She was kind to everyone, but she looked out for me especially after my father died. When she left the village, she promised to send for me someday, but life, he trailed off, shaking his head. Richard felt an ache in his chest. He had thought he knew every chapter of Anna's life, yet here was a whole story he had never been told. Why are you here, Ethan? He asked quietly. Because I needed work, came the simple answer. And maybe because life brought me back to where I was meant to be. The sincerity in Ethan's voice was disarming, stripping away the walls Richard had built around his grief. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the powerful CEO and the humble janitor, bound by the memory of the same woman. Richard dismissed him with a nod, but as Ethan left, the CEO's thoughts swirled. This wasn't over. He needed to know more, not just for his own sake, but for Lily's. Somewhere in Ethan's quiet demeanor and unspoken words lay a truth that might change the way they both saw Anna's legacy forever. The next morning, Lily appeared in the staff cafeteria carrying 2 trays of food, one of which she placed in front of a very surprised Ethan. You're eating with me, she said simply, switching to Mandarin as though it were their private language. Over noodles and tea, Ethan told her stories of a place she'd only known from her mother's faint memories, of narrow dirt roads winding through green hills, of festivals where lanterns lit up the night sky, of the little market stall where her mother had once sold fresh vegetables with a smile that could charm even the grumpiest villager. Lily laughed, leaning in, her eyes sparkling in a way Richard hadn't seen in years. When Richard walked past the cafeteria and caught sight of them, he stopped, watching quietly from the doorway. There was something in Ethan's presence that brought out a side of his daughter that had been missing since Anna's passing, a warmth, a curiosity, a connection to her roots. That evening, Richard called Ethan into his office again, but this time there was no interrogation. You've given my daughter something I couldn't, Richard admitted, his voice softer than usual. You've given her a part of her mother back. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, shaking his head. It's just a language, sir. Richard smiled faintly. No, it's family. He paused, then continued, I want you to stay. Not just as a janitor, but as her mentor. Teach her everything you can about where her mother came from. The food, the traditions, the stories, all of it. Ethan was silent for a moment, his eyes glistening. He thought of Anna's promise all those years ago, of the life they had both dreamed of, and realized that maybe this was his chance to fulfill it in a way neither of them had imagined. I would be honored, he said at last. From that day forward, Ethan's mop and bucket were set aside more often than not, replaced by afternoons spent with Lily in the library, practicing Mandarin characters, cooking dumplings in the company kitchen, and laughing over tales from a village far away. And though the building still gleamed under his care, it was the bond between them, the shy janitor, the CEO's daughter, and the woman they both loved, that shone brightest of all.